I was born in a small dusty town where the wind carried songs of pain and hope together. My mother used to say that the sky had its own language, and if I listened close enough, I could hear what the clouds were trying to tell me. I grew up listening to stories under the mango tree near our house, stories of love, loss, and dreams that were too heavy for our small world. I was just a girl with bare feet and wild hair, but inside me lived a longing for something bigger, something I couldn't name back then. Life in my village was simple. We woke with the sun and slept when the moon smiled. My mother sold handmade baskets, and I helped her weave them with my little fingers. My father had passed when I was 6, so she carried both love and struggle on her shoulders. Yet every evening, when the world went quiet, she would hum an old lullaby, one that always made me feel like love could still be found even in broken places. One summer morning, when the air was thick with heat and dust, I met him. Ethan. He came with a group of volunteers from the U.S., smiling in a way that made everything else slow down. I still remember the first time I saw him stepping out of that old van, his skin pale under the sun, eyes curious like a child seeing a new world. He greeted everyone with kindness, and when he reached me, he just said, "Hi, I'm Ethan." Simple words, but they stayed with me. He started working at our village school, teaching English and art to children who had never held a paintbrush before. The first time he smiled at one of their drawings, I saw something pure in his eyes, like he wasn't here to save anyone, just to understand them. Every morning I brought tea to the volunteers, a small clay cup in my hands, the steam rising like invisible prayers. He always waited for his cup, pretending not to notice I brought his first. We would sit by the mango tree after the lessons, talking about things I didn't even know I could talk about. The ocean he came from, the stars I'd never seen, the idea of a world where dreams didn't need permission. He told me that love wasn't something you planned. It just happened quietly, like rain that falls even when the sky looks dry. And maybe that's what happened to me. Days turned into weeks, and each one made me softer toward him. He would help the children draw, then hand me the brush and say, "Your turn, Amara." I'd laugh, tell him I couldn't paint, but he'd insist, "Then let your heart paint." And somehow I did. We painted sunsets, rivers, even a version of our mango tree that looked more like a dream than reality. One afternoon, while everyone rested, he carved something into the tree's bark, our initials, A and E, hidden behind the leaves. When I asked why, he said, "So, even if time forgets us, the tree will remember." But time doesn't always forget. Sometimes it just waits to break you later. The day he told me he had to return to America, the air felt heavier. I tried to smile, to be the strong girl my mother had raised, but my voice trembled when I asked when he'd come back. He held my hands and said, "Soon. I'll come back for you. I promise." He gave me a small silver chain with a pendant shaped like a heart, and I gave him a letter I had written the night before. It said, "Even if you go far away, take my heart with you, because it only beats when it remembers you." He left the next morning. I watched that van disappear into the horizon, my chest aching like something sacred had been taken from me. Days became months. I wrote him letters every week, never missing one. But no letter ever came back. Still, I kept writing, because sometimes hope is all you have left to hold. Each letter began with the same words, "Dear Ethan, I still believe in the promises we made under the mango tree." Years passed, and I became the teacher he once was. I taught children to dream, to draw, to speak of love without fear. But inside, there was still a part of me waiting under that same tree. Then one day, I received a letter, but not from him. It was from his sister. She wrote that Ethan had died in a car accident the day he was supposed to fly back to Africa. She said he had my letter in his hand when they found him. I read that line again and again until the words Noel. I still remember the night when Ethan told me he was leaving for New York. It felt like the air around me turned cold, my hands were trembling, but I tried to hide it. I smiled, pretending to be strong, because that's what I always did, hide the pain behind a calm face. He said it was only for a few months, that he would come back as soon as his new project was done, but deep down I knew something was changing in his eyes. His voice had distance, his hug was shorter, his kiss colder. I watched him leave that night from the small window of my room, the same window where we used to count stars together and dream about forever. I stayed there long after he was gone, whispering his name as if it could bring him back. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I tried to keep myself busy, painting, singing, cooking, anything that could stop my mind from remembering him, but every time I touched a brush, every time I hummed a song, it was him who came to life again, his laughter, his touch, his smell. Sometimes I would stand in front of the mirror and ask myself if I wasn't enough. Maybe love wasn't enough for him. Maybe dreams mattered more. Maybe the city lights of New York had already taken my place. One evening it started raining heavy and the power went out. I sat near the window listening to the rain. When my phone lit up, it was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me whispered, "Pick up the call." I did, and the moment I heard his voice, my heart forgot how to beat. He said my name so softly it felt like a dream. He said, "Amara, I'm sorry I had to go. I thought I was doing the right thing for us, but I lost myself here. I lost what mattered." I wanted to scream at him, to ask where he had been all these months, why he left me alone, but all I said was, "Ethan, please come back." And he said, "I'm trying, I promise." After that night, we started talking again. Not much, just small calls, texts, pictures of the sky. We both missed our skies. It was like trying to rebuild something that once broke into a million pieces. I didn't trust easily anymore, but he was patient, gentle. He reminded me of who I used to be before heartbreak made me silent. Slowly I let him in again. But life doesn't give you happiness without testing how much pain you can take before that happiness arrives. One morning I got a call from his friend. He said Ethan had been in an accident. I couldn't breathe. I dropped the phone and ran outside barefoot through the wet streets, my heart pounding, my body shaking. Every second felt like eternity. When I reached the hospital, the smell of medicine and fear hit me hard. I found him lying there, pale, quiet, with tubes around him. I took his hand and whispered, "It's me, Amara. I'm here." His fingers moved slowly, and his lips curved into a weak smile. He said, "You came," and I said, "Always." He survived, but he wasn't the same. His memory came and went like waves. Sometimes he remembered our songs, sometimes he didn't even know my name, and yet every day I sat beside him telling our story again and again, until one evening he looked at me and said, "Now I remember everything." He smiled the way he used to under the African sun and whispered, "You are my home." After that day, everything felt fragile, like a glass heart trying to beat again. He was alive, and that was enough for me, but I could see the emptiness in his eyes. He wasn't the same man who once dreamed under the stars with me. He woke up at night sweating, asking where he was. He forgot small things like my birthday, the street where we first met, even the taste of the tea I used to make for him. Sometimes I wanted to cry in front of him, but I couldn't. I had to be the strong one. I smiled for both of us. I laughed for both of us. I held his hand tighter so he wouldn't drift away again. We moved to a small house near the ocean. The waves became our new lullaby. He spent hours sitting by the shore, sketching boats on old pieces of paper. I used to watch him from the kitchen window and wonder if he was drawing memories or escape plans. Sometimes he would look at me and smile faintly, as if he knew I was watching. That smile kept me alive. One morning, he asked me to walk with him. We went to the cliff where the sea touched the sky. He said, "Amara, do you think people can love more than once?" I didn't know what to say. I just looked at him and whispered, "Maybe, but not the same way." He nodded slowly and said, "Then I guess I only loved once." Those words wrapped around my heart like a promise that couldn't die. Months passed. He started painting again. His first painting after the accident was of me standing in the rain holding a broken umbrella. He called it "The Girl Who Waited." I cried when I saw it because that was me. Every brush stroke carried the silence of the nights I spent waiting for him one evening. He told me he got an offer from a gallery in New York. They wanted him to exhibit his work. My heart sank. I knew what that meant. Another goodbye, but this time he said, I want you to come with me. So we left. The ocean behind the city was loud, bright, full of stories we didn't belong to yet, but somehow it accepted us. We rented a small apartment near Central Park. It wasn't much, but it felt like hope. We spent our mornings drinking coffee by the window and our nights painting, dreaming, and sometimes fighting, because that's what real love does. It breaks and builds you at the same time. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of him coughing. He said he was fine, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He brushed it off, said it was just exhaustion from the gallery work. A few weeks later, during his exhibition, he collapsed in front of everyone. I ran to him, screaming his name, but his eyes rolled back before he could even say mine. The hospital lights, the sirens, the chaos, everything blurred together. I sat in the hallway praying, begging the universe to take anything but not him. The doctor came out. His face told me before his words could. He said it was a rare heart condition, something they missed after the accident. He said they would try their best, but his heart was weak. I spent nights beside his bed again, listening to machines beep like broken clocks, counting the seconds. I could still have him with me. One evening, he opened his eyes and whispered, Amar, I'm tired. I told him to rest. He smiled and said, No, I'm tired of fighting. I kissed his forehead, tears falling onto his skin, and said, if you have to go, just promise me you'll wait for me wherever you're going. He smiled one last time and whispered, always, before his hand went still. For days I couldn't speak. The world became silent. Even the city that never sleeps felt like it stopped breathing. I walked through the streets like a ghost, carrying memories instead of dreams. One day, I went to the ocean alone, and threw his ashes into the waves. I whispered our story to the wind so it could carry it to him wherever he was. Years passed. People told me to move on, but how do you move on from the only soul that ever saw you completely? I still paint sometimes, and every painting has a trace of him in the colors, in the light, in the shadow. Sometimes at night, I hear his voice in my dreams saying, Amara, look at the stars. I look up and smile because I know he's still there watching, just like he promised. Years went by like silent seasons. I stopped counting them because every day felt the same. A cup of tea by the window, the sound of rain against glass, and the memory of his voice living somewhere between my heartbeat and my breath. I never tried to love again, not because I didn't believe in love, but because I had already met the kind that doesn't repeat itself, the kind that burns once and then lives as light inside you forever. People used to tell me, time heals, but they were wrong. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to hide the pain better. One afternoon, I was sitting in a small cafe near the art district where Ethan's paintings were once displayed. The walls were covered with faces of strangers, painted by dreamers who wanted to be seen. I was sketching quietly when a young man approached me. He had the same hazel eyes, the same calm voice that used to steady me. He said, Excuse me, are you Amara? I nodded slowly. He smiled and said, My name is Liam. I'm Ethan's brother. I had never met him before. He lived abroad when Ethan and I were together. Seeing him was like being hit by a memory, wearing a new face. We sat together for hours. He told me stories about Ethan's childhood, things I never knew, how he used to draw on the back of his notebooks, how he wanted to travel to Africa before he even met me, and how he once said, There's someone out there who'll make me feel like the sun is inside me. Liam said, He used to talk about you all the time. I felt tears filling my eyes, but they didn't hurt this time. They felt warm, like something beautiful had been returned to me. Liam started visiting often, sometimes to bring me old sketches Ethan left behind, sometimes just to sit quietly. We never talked about love. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding between us built from shared loss. One evening, he brought me a box of Ethan's things. Inside was a letter sealed and old, the paper yellow at the edges. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter said, If you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise. I wanted to grow old with you, Amara, but if life had other plans, I want you to know this love doesn't end, it just changes shape. Maybe one day someone will find you and remind you to smile again. When that happens, don't run from it, because that's me loving you through them. I cried for hours holding that letter against my heart, and for the first time in years I felt peace, like he was still with me, not as pain, but as presence. Liam stayed by my side through quiet days and lonely nights. He never tried to replace Ethan, he just became part of the space where Ethan once lived. One day, he told me he was moving to Ghana for an art project. He asked me to come with him. I hesitated, but something inside whispered go. When I stepped off the plane and felt the African sun on my skin again, it was like breathing after a long time. We visited villages, painted walls with children, watched sunsets that melted into the sea. Liam would look at me sometimes and smile, that same quiet smile Ethan used to have. One evening we stood under a sky full of stars, the same stars Ethan and I once counted. He took my hand and said, "You don't have to answer, but I love you, not because of who you were with my brother, but because of who you are when you smile." I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Ethan, if you can hear me, I kept your promise. I didn't stop living, I didn't stop loving, because love never dies, it just finds new ways to return." And as the wind moved gently through the trees, I felt him there, not gone, not lost, just somewhere close enough to let me breathe again. Life in Africa changed me in ways I never expected. The air felt different here, softer, kinder, like it had stories to tell if you listen close enough. I started teaching art to the children in a small village near the coast. They reminded me of hope, wild, free, untouched by the weight of the world. Every morning they would run to me with brushes in their hands, shouting my name. Their laughter healed something in me that even time couldn't touch. When I looked at them, I didn't see loss anymore, I saw continuation. I saw color returning to a life that once felt gray. Liam and I built a small art center together. We painted the walls bright blue with white patterns inspired by Ethan's old sketches. It wasn't just a building, it was a heartbeat, a place where pain turned into art and silence into song. Sometimes, when I stood there surrounded by laughter and colors, I would close my eyes and whisper, "Thank you, Ethan, for leading me here." I knew somehow he could hear me. The evenings in Ghana were magical. The sky would burn orange, then fade into purple, and the ocean would whisper secrets to the shore. Liam and I would sit outside watching the horizon. I would tell him stories of the nights Ethan and I spent chasing fireflies, and he would listen like he was hearing poetry. I think that's what love becomes after pain. It turns gentle, like a lullaby that no longer needs words. Years passed like pages turning softly. One by one the world changed. The children grew up. The art center became known beyond the village. Artists came from everywhere to learn and share their stories. I became something I never imagined, a woman who turned sorrow into light. One day a journalist came to interview me. She asked how I survived losing the love of my life. I smiled and said, "Maybe I never lost him. Maybe he just changed form." Sometimes love doesn't stay in the way we expect it to. It becomes wind, it becomes color, it becomes the reason we wake up and keep going. Liam and I never rushed what we were. We didn't even call it love. For a long time, we just existed in each other's company, filling the spaces between loneliness with quiet understanding. One night, when rain began to fall softly on the tin roof, he held my hand and said, "You know, I used to think love was finding someone who made you forget your past, but now I think real love is finding someone who helps you remember it without pain." I looked at him and whispered, "Thank you for loving me in the way that doesn't demand forgetting." We built a small house near the edge of the village, white walls, blue windows, the sea just a few steps away. In the mornings, I painted while he read or fixed frames, and in the evenings we cooked together, laughing at burnt bread or spilled paint. Life had become simple, beautiful, fragile, and full of meaning. Sometimes, when the wind blew strong through the open windows, I could almost hear Ethan's laughter in it, like he was still part of our home. Years went on like a slow song until one morning I woke up and realized my hair had turned silver. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror, but I liked her. She carried storms in her eyes and calm in her smile. I walked down to the beach barefoot the same way I did when I was young, and I whispered to the sea. I kept my promise. I lived, I loved, I stayed kind, and the waves answered softly, as if to say, "I know." When Liam passed away quietly one evening, it didn't break me the way loss used to. I sat beside him, holding his hand, feeling the rhythm of his last breath. I didn't cry, because this time I understood death wasn't an ending, it was a return to everything we loved. He once told me love is energy, and energy never dies, it only transforms. When he left, I felt peace, because I knew somewhere Ethan and Liam had found each other, and they were both smiling at me. Now I am old, my hands shake when I paint, but I still paint. I still sit by the same window watching the same ocean, and I still talk to them both. Sometimes children come to visit me. They call me Mama Amara. They ask for stories, and I tell them not fairy tales, but real ones about a girl who loved a boy so much. She crossed oceans, lost herself, found herself again, and learned that love isn't about keeping someone, it's about keeping them alive inside you forever. And when the night falls and the stars appear, I whisper the same words I once said years ago: love never dies, it just finds new ways to come back. And somewhere between the stars and the sea, I feel them both close enough to make me smile again. The years became softer after Liam left. I stopped keeping calendars, because time no longer felt like something to measure. It just moved like the tide, coming and going quietly. Every morning I still woke up before the sun and sat by the window watching the light spill across the sea. The horizon always looked the same, yet different every day, like life itself, a repetition of beauty, wearing new faces. I had begun writing letters to Ethan and Liam, not to send them anywhere, but to keep the conversations alive. Sometimes I would hide them in books, sometimes beneath paintings. I told them about the children, about the ocean, about how I could still hear their laughter in the wind. One afternoon, a letter arrived from New York. It was from a museum. They were organizing an exhibition called Souls in Color, and they wanted to feature my paintings. At first, I hesitated. It had been years since I left America, but something inside whispered, this is where the story began. Maybe it's time to return, not to relive, but to remember. So I packed a few canvases, my brushes, and that old photograph of Ethan smiling beneath the African sun, and flew back to the city where I had once lost and found everything. The moment I stepped out of the airport, the air hit me different. It smelled of rain and nostalgia. The streets were louder, brighter, but my heart was calm. I stayed in a small apartment near Central Park, the same place where Ethan and I once dreamed of growing old together. The city hadn't changed much, but I wasn't the young girl chasing love anymore. I was a woman carrying decades of it within her like a quiet fire. The day of the exhibition came. The museum walls were white, the lights warm. People stood in front of my paintings, whispering words I couldn't hear, but could feel. One of the pieces was Ethan's old painting, The Girl Who Waited, restored, and framed beside it was mine, the woman who remembered, both facing each other like two souls finally at peace. I stood there watching strangers cry in front of my work, and for the first time, I understood what my life had become. Art was never about beauty, it was about truth, about leaving something behind, so that even when you're gone, your heart keeps speaking. After the exhibition, a young woman approached me. She said my name softly, like it was sacred. She told me she was an art student who grew up in Ghana. She said she joined my art center as a child years ago, and that it changed her life. She said she learned from my story that love and pain can live together without destroying each other, that healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering differently. She gave me a bracelet made of seashells and said, I made this for you, from the same beach where we used to paint when I was little. I held it and smiled, and for a moment it felt like all the years between then and now vanished. I spent a few months in New York visiting old places, the park, the gallery, the streets where Ethan and I used to walk. Everything felt like a dream that had finally forgiven itself. Sometimes I would sit on a bench and watch the city lights and imagine Ethan beside me, not as a ghost, but as presence, soft, invisible, real. I would talk to him quietly, saying, see, I made it, we made it, and I swear the wind would answer with a warmth that touched my skin. When I returned to Africa, the children from the art center had grown into artists themselves. They painted stories of love and lost hope and courage. The walls of the village glowed with colors. Every corner told a story. I realized then that my life wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I gave, what I left behind. I started writing a book not about Ethan or Liam or even myself, but about love as I had known it, love that breaks, builds, disappears, returns, and never really dies. I called it the color of forever. As the years slowed, I began to feel my body grow tired, but my heart remained full. Sometimes at night, I would dream of a field endless and golden with both Ethan and Liam waiting for me, smiling not as memories, but as light. They didn't say anything they didn't need to. The peace in their eyes was enough to tell me it was almost time. One morning I sat by the ocean watching the sun rise, and I whispered, "I'm ready not to leave, but to return." They found me there later that day, sitting quietly, my brush still in hand, the last painting unfinished. It was a sky full of stars, and beneath it two silhouettes, holding hands, one taller, one shorter, and the words written softly at the bottom, "Love is not what ends, it's what remains." Years later, the Art Center became a foundation for artists across Africa and America. They named it Amara, House of Light. Every year, young painters gathered by the ocean to celebrate her memory, and her story became a legend, a story mothers told their daughters, a story of a girl who loved across con. Years turned into decades. After I was gone, the waves still whispered my name against the African shore, and every year on the day the sun burned brightest, children gathered by the sea to paint. They said it was Amara Day, the day to remember that love can survive anything. The Art Center had grown far beyond the small blue-walled house Liam and I built. It had become a home for dreamers from every part of the world. They came carrying brushes, cameras, notebooks, hearts full of stories that needed a place to breathe. They said the walls of the center smelled of salt and memory, that sometimes when the wind blew from the ocean it sounded like laughter echoing from another time. In New York, the museum kept one corner named after me, the Amara Gallery. They displayed the two paintings, The Girl Who Waited and The Woman Who Remembered, side by side. Visitors often stood silently before them, not knowing the story, only feeling something move inside their chest. One evening, a little girl with dark curls stood staring at the paintings. She asked her mother, "Who are they?" Her mother said, "They're people who loved so much that even time couldn't separate them." The girl didn't say anything. She just smiled and whispered, "I want to paint like her one day." That girl grew up to be one of the greatest painters of her generation. Her name was Lena. She traveled to Ghana to see where it all began. When she arrived at the Amara house, she found the old room where I once painted still untouched, the windows still blue, the smell of sea salt still alive. She spent months painting there, talking to the locals, listening to the stories of how I turned sorrow into light. One evening, while walking along the beach, she saw an old woman sitting quietly watching the sunset. The woman said I knew her. She taught me how to see colors in pain. Lena sat beside her, and they talked for hours about love and memory. When the woman left, she gave Lena a small shell bracelet and said, "Keep this, it carries her spirit." Lena went back to America and opened an art school named the Color of Forever Institute. She filled it with paintings inspired by the ocean, by Africa, by a love that never died. She told her students about me, about Ethan, about Liam, about how real art isn't made from happiness, but from truth. She said every brushstroke should feel like a heartbeat, every color like forgiveness. Years later, when she became old, she wrote in her diary, "I never met Amara, but she taught me how to feel, and that is the same as meeting her." The story of my life turned into a film decades later. A director found my letters in the museum archive. He read them all and said, "This is not a tragedy, this is a hymn." He made a movie called Beyond Forever. The world watched it, cried, for it lived through it. They said it was the kind of story that makes you hold someone's hand a little tighter. People from every country wrote letters saying they found a piece of themselves in Amara's journey, that they learned to forgive, that they started painting again, that they called someone they hadn't spoken to in years. The film became more than a movie, it became a mirror. Some nights, I imagine the world from where I am now, endless light, endless sea. I can see them, all the children, painting by the ocean, the visitors standing before my paintings, Lena teaching her students in a sunlit room, the waves carrying whispers across continents. And I smile because I understand now that eternity isn't a place, it's the echo of love that keeps moving through time-changing form but never ending. Once in a while, when the wind moves over the African coast, people say they can hear a faint melody, a woman's voice singing in the distance. They say it sounds like someone calling a name softly over and over, not in grief, but in joy, like she finally found what she was searching for. And maybe that's true, maybe that's me singing, still painting, still loving, because love is not what ends, it's what remains. Years later, when the world had changed again, and her name had turned into a quiet legend, the Amara Foundation stood tall by the same ocean where everything began. The walls were covered with paintings from every part of the world, all telling the same story in different colors, a story about love, loss, and the courage to begin again. Children laughed in the courtyard, their hands covered in paint, their eyes bright with dreams, and on the main wall above the entrance were written the words she once spoke: love never dies, it just finds new ways to come back. Every evening at sunset, the teachers would light small lanterns and set them afloat in the sea, one for every artist who had loved fearlessly and lived truthfully. The horizon would glow with hundreds of tiny lights dancing across the water, like stars returning home. People said when the wind blew from the east, you could almost hear her laughter in its soft, gentle, endless. In New York, the museum still kept her corner untouched. The two paintings still faced each other, and every year visitors placed white flowers beneath them. They said it was tradition to close your eyes and make a wish for someone you loved. The curators never explained why, they just smiled and said it started with her. One day, a little boy visiting the museum with his mother pointed at the painting and said, "Mom, who is she?" And the mother smiled and said, "She's the woman who taught the world that love is stronger than time." The boy thought for a moment, then said, "I think she's still painting up there somewhere." And his mother nodded softly, "Maybe she is." And somewhere beyond the reach of the sea and sky, where colors never fade and hearts never break, Amara stands before a canvas that stretches into forever. Her hands steady, her eyes bright. She dips her brush into the light itself and paints the one thing she always believed in the most: not a face, not a place, but a feeling, love, pure, endless, alive. And as she paints, the world below keeps breathing in rhythm with her strokes, because her story never really ended. It just became part of every soul that still dares to love.